So this is the first meeting that we are having purely online. And as you know, the first one was just maybe one of the last, if not the last meeting that we had at the agency physical, just before that we had the lockdown and that we have to maybe change our practices and go into a more online environment. So we have today this virtual meeting of the two groups. We had a lot of experiences last year as we were on BCP, on Business Continuity Plan, but I think we never plan a meeting like this, which is a bit more ambitious, where we have to try to have a proper agenda. And I think the agenda of today, despite it's not a full day, is going to focus on three main elements. The first one will be to give an update on the activities that the agency is having on COVID and how the agency is responding to this challenging situation. And as you know, I mean, of course, we have a key role to play. And we will have the key people at the agency involved in leading this response from our side to give an update and also to offer the possibility to discuss an aspect. We will then focus on the shortage and availability, and this is a follow-up discussions from previous meetings where we will be able to maybe follow up and give an update on what the EMA and HMA task force are doing, but also to hear from patients and healthcare professionals. And finally, we will have a third session on data protection and the work which is being done in order to come up with the Q&A on secondary use of healthcare data, where you, patients and healthcare professional organizations are very much and heavily involved in this preparation. So just to maybe make clear that we are recording the meeting, and only the first two topics will be posted on the website. This will be done hopefully by Thursday. We want to do it as soon as possible and to make it publicly available to everybody. And maybe before jumping already on the meeting, I would like to give the floor to the co-chairs to give a first very brief introduction. So I would like to introduce Uli Jäger. Uli, please, the floor is yours if you want to give a short introduction.
Thank you very much, Juan. Unusual situation for all of us, not really, because we've been doing this for many months now. And I also see my co-chair Kaiser, who is also now online. Thanks very much for organizing this. I think this is in the utmost interest of all patients and healthcare professionals. And I welcome everybody, and we are looking forward to the presentations.
Thank you, Uli, very much. Kaiser, would you like to? Sorry, Kaiser, we can't hear you. Maybe while colleagues can sort this out, maybe then we can briefly mention a little bit about the meeting etiquette. Only presenters are able to speak. The rest of participants are muted, and this is in order to avoid background noises, because sometimes in the experiences with this kind of meetings, so that there is a lot of background, so to minimize that. However, after each presentation, you will be able to talk, and you can raise your hand, and by raising your hand, which is the icon where you can see the person with the head, we will give you the floor and you will be able to speak. There is also the possibility, if you want, that you can type a question, and we can also try to answer that in writing. If it's not possible during the meeting, we will come back later. So, but I mean, we encourage everybody afterwards during the Q&A sessions that they can make questions. So I think unless anything else, because I understand Kaiser still is not fixed, so we can maybe move to the first session, and maybe we'll give the floor to Kaiser later. And I think, again, the first session I said is a little bit focused on COVID and how we have responded. There has been a lot of requests, and it was a time that we were able to give an update to patients and healthcare professionals organizations about how the agency is working and how we are responding to the challenge that we are facing because of COVID-19. And we have tried to identify the key elements of our response, and we have invited the people living within the agency on the different areas to give an update on that. And it's my pleasure to introduce Noel Bation, that I'm sure you all know. Noel Bation is the Deputy Executive Director and is leading the task force on COVID-19. So we give the floor to Noel to give an introduction on our contribution to the pandemic response. We cannot hear Noel.
Thank you very much, Juan. Do you hear me? Okay, thank you. Thank you very much for the invitation, and I'm pleased to give you some overview of where we are in terms of the EMA. So the agency's contribution to the pandemic response. First of all, we should say that of course this has come as a quite another challenge, not only of course for the EMA but for the entire world. So we rapidly developed a COVID-19 task force, which I am chairing, and Fergus Sweeney as my vice chair. We developed this task force in order to see how we, as an EMA, can respond in the best possible way to the challenges that we're going to face over the next months to come. So we have 4 types of work streams: therapeutic response, supply chain, business continuity and impact, and human resources. We will today primarily focus on therapeutic response and on supply chain. Business continuity and impact. This is primarily in order to see how can we cope over the next months to come with a steady increase in workload for COVID-19 related procedures, whilst also, of course, we will have to deal with all the other business of the agency, and human resources links into this because we have to make sure that we have the necessary amount of staff in order to deal with it. So moving to the next slide, which is about the task force itself, is to ensure the agency's business continuity in any possible scenario following the outbreak of the COVID-19 infections in Europe. It's to oversee the work undertaken in the 4 areas of activities pertaining to the 4 work streams, and to routinely inform the executive board, that's the agency's senior management structure, on its progress. As was mentioned in the previous slide, there is also an institutional coordination, and that institutional coordination, which is headed by the director, by Guido Rasi, is to steer the work of the task force in order to ensure alignment with the direction of travel of other institutions and bodies at operational and primarily at political level, in close liaison with the European Commission. And then we have the various work streams to facilitate the work of the COVID-19 task force, supported by teams of colleagues responsible for specific activities and deliverables. Each work stream will analyze data, will propose solutions, provide outcomes to the task force, where they are further reviewed and sent for final endorsement by the executive board. As I mentioned before, there are 2 important work streams. One is therapeutic response, which is headed by Marco Cavalieri, who is also head of the ETF, the EMA pandemic task force, and which will look at all the therapeutics and the vaccines that will be coming up for review by the agency. The other one is on supply chain, which is headed by Monica Diaz, and that work stream will look into all type of supply shortages, and she will further elaborate on that. Now, an important element is communication. So what do we do in terms of communication? There are press releases and lines to take for the network itself, meaning the member states and the European Commission. Monica will elaborate further on the EU Executive Steering Group meetings, where we are providing the outcome to the heads of agencies, the European Commission, and the CMD agency and the fee structures. And then you will see regular updates on our EMA website on COVID-19 vaccines, on therapeutics, the latest development in these areas, availability of medicines during the emergency, and the outcomes of the steering group discussion, any public health advice that we have given. I think one of the most recent one was on chloroquine and hydroxychloroquine, where, for instance, the FDA issued an emergency authorization for both compounds for use in coronavirus patients in March, and then later on the FDA joined with the European Medicines Agency in urging against their use outside the clinical trials. Of course, we're also providing guidance to companies who would like to benefit from some regulatory flexibility when they are confronted, for instance, with particular issues in relation to supply shortages. Recently, we held the first press briefing on the 14th of May to give an update on where we are in terms of our preparedness, and also first status report on therapeutics and vaccines where we are providing advice. So Juan, I hand back to you. This was a short introduction to the work that is being performed by the agency. Thank you.
I understand Noel is not able to stay the whole time, so maybe if you have any question, maybe then maybe we can then give the floor to Kaisa. That I understand she couldn't talk before. Can we have now Kaisa?
Hello, can you hear me?
Very well, Kaisa.
Oh, hello. I'm not going to add a lot because we already started the meeting. So just to say hello to everyone. And yeah, indeed, this is a new way of interaction. And we have a long meeting today, but it's full of really important. So I hope you are as active as you can. And you can also put questions in the chat. So we'll try to keep track of those as well. Yeah, I will happy to hand back to Juan now.
Perfect. Thank you, Kaisa. I understand that we have a question in writing. Maybe, Maria, can you read it for everyone?
Yes, sure, Juan. The question was from Roland Pochet. Who are the members of the COVID-19 task force?
Noel, would you like to answer that?
Yes, I can. You mean which task force? Because we have to be clear. So you're not talking about the task force that I was just alluding to, because that is an internal task force. When you're referring to the ETF, that is headed, as I mentioned, by Marco Cavalieri. Here you have the chairs of the various scientific committees, so the CHMP and other committees, and additional experts. These from the basis of the ETF.
Thank you very much. Any further question? Okay, so I think maybe then, if there are no questions on this introduction, we can maybe move to the next point. And hopefully we have Marco already with us.
Not yet, Juan.
Okay, so maybe while we work, we wait for him. Yeah, maybe we can, if there is no more question, maybe I wanted to just to give a brief update. I wanted to jump because the agenda is so packed that I wanted, but maybe just to make a little bit of mention all the observers that we have in the meeting today, because taking advantage that we are having an online platform and that we are able to accommodate more participants, we have, beyond the normal working party members, we have offered the possibility to other eligible organizations to participate. And in this case, we have, for example, representatives from Healthcare Without Harm, from the European Organization for Research and Treatment of Cancer, from EORTC. We have representatives from Lymphoma Coalition Europe, from the European Huntington Association, from the Association of European Cancer Leagues, Then we have WONCA from the GPs, representing GPs. We have Biomed Alliance. We have the European Association for the Study of the Liver, the European Society of Oncology Pharmacy, the European Hemophilia Consortium, the European Men Alliance, the European Lung Foundation, the Fabry International Network, SMA Europe, and International Gottshare Alliance. So these representatives have been able to join, so we would like to welcome them. In addition, we have observers ad hoc from the Task Force of Shortage and Availability from different member states. We have from Denmark, from Latvia, from Czech Republic, from Belgium, and from Ireland, as well as Spain and Croatia. And then we have as well observers. We have from PMDA, Japan, we have Yasuhiro Kishioka, we have Sandra Kuder from the FDA, we have Marco Greco and Wolf Dieter Ludwig, which are patients and healthcare professional representatives in the management board of the agency. And then we have as well Gabrielle Ebenstein from CNDH, and then we have representatives from the Working Group of Communication Professionals. It's an HMA group on communication officials from the different member states, with Chiara Panci, Diego Pernas, and Inbil Knudsen from Norway. So I think because we still don't have Marco, so that I can see, we have Fergus. So I think we can move to the next part of the presentations. And I think before having Marco, even if it is more logical, but I think in terms of time, that we can maybe go and have the presentation from Fergus on the support that we are having to research and clinical trials. So this is where we are going to discuss a little bit what's going on in terms of research and how the agency is supporting clinical trials and research on COVID-19. And we have with us Fergus Sweeney, we have Xavier Kurz, and we have Peter Arlett. So maybe we can give the floor and we can take this presentation now.
Okay, good afternoon, everybody. I hope you can hear me now. This is Fergus Sweeney.
We can hear you very well, Fergus.
So, good afternoon, everyone. This is Fergus Sweeney. I'm head of the Clinical Studies and Manufacturing Task Force at the EMA. Apologies for the technical interruption. So, I want to give a brief overview of a number of actions and initiatives that have been taken, and also some statistics on clinical trials in the EU for the treatment of COVID-19. So, first of all, just to remind everyone that, and indeed we've made publications in this area and calls, international coordination is needed to ensure conduct of large, decision-relevant COVID-19 clinical trials. It's only through large, well-conducted, well-designed, and randomized clinical trials that we will get answers on which to base decisions about medicines, whether they're repurposed existing medicines or new medicines which are being developed. So it's extremely important that we have these trials and that these trials can be as large as they need to be and spread out over as many member states as possible for the larger trials. So as part of managing clinical trials within the COVID-19 pandemic, clearly the social distancing in particular and all of the consequences of that in terms of the ability of people to interact has an impact on clinical trials, and the heads of medicines agencies, the European Commission and the European Medicines Agency have published and indeed updated 3 times the guidance on the management of clinical trials during the COVID-19 pandemic. Its first priority and objective is to protect the clinical trial participants, both in terms of the continuation of their treatment within the trial where possible, and in particular for important therapies which may be life-saving or certainly of significant health benefit for those patients, but also protecting them in terms of minimizing avoidable visits to clinics and hospitals. in order to maintain and enable them to maintain social distancing and also the site staff to do so. We've also set out that clinical trials for the treatment of COVID-19 will be prioritized where there is a need to do that, but also treatments for other life-threatening or seriously debilitating conditions. And as much as possible to enable trials to continue and to ensure the reliability of trial results. So in order to achieve that, the guidance covers a whole range of areas. I won't go through all of these, but for instance, there may be changes to ongoing trials, enabling, for example, the supply of the investigational product to patients at their homes where that would be advantageous and possible. Changes in the monitoring approaches for the companies, because the clinical trial monitors will often not be able to visit the site. There are some additional guidance on the use of informed consent, for instance, in the context of the COVID-19 disease itself, and the need to maintain isolation for infected patients in the hospital environment, and the impact that can have on a variety of things, including the paperwork that goes around informed consent, but still ensuring that proper consent can be obtained, and a number of other aspects. So it's keeping a good balance and a risk proportionate balance, but first of all, focusing on patient and participant safety, which is of prime importance. As an extension to that, it's clearly understood that a number of visits by participants to the clinic, and therefore the interactions and discussion with the doctor and staff maybe have to take place by phone, or may take place at different intervals to those expected under the trial protocol, and this may result in a range of protocol deviations, perhaps trial participants also not being able to continue with the study, particularly those who were participating during the phases of extensive lockdown. So the Biostats Working Party has also published a guidance in order on handling these issues, their actions, responses to take to help ensure the integrity of their studies and study data, always prioritizing participant safety, encouraging sponsors to seek scientific advice where they have difficulties and perhaps gaps in their data, and making clear that EMA will be flexible and pragmatic during the assessment of the affected trial data. So we'll obviously have to see on a case-by-case basis what the impact has been, but consider that in a reasonable light. Now, of course, the pandemic has triggered a lot of research, and that's really important. We have 303 trials, so this is as of the 26th of May, loaded into UCT, and 193 approved, 101 under assessment, 9 withdrawn or refused. Of these, 2 trials were already ongoing before 2020, but now include COVID-19 patients. 34 were approved in March, 114 in April, 43 in May. Obviously, we're in June now, so more clinical trial applications will be coming in. You can find information from the EU Clinical Trial Register on COVID-19 trials on the EMA website, and we can circulate more information if participants wish in that respect. But the links are on our website, and they refresh on a daily basis. So from these trials, 238 are from non-commercial, so from academia, academic sponsors, health institutions, and 56 from commercial sponsors. 257 are conducted in only one member state. And that's an important message, coming back to what I said earlier. We need to enable networks of investigators, of researchers to form across member states in order to build these trials up. And this will become really important now as we're entering into the phases when vaccines will start to be tested in larger trials. 13 trials in 2 member states, 14 in 3 to 5, and 9 in 5 member states, or more than 5 member states. And it starts to see a pattern as well, although a large number are from non-commercial sponsors in the smaller numbers of member states. As you push up the numbers of member states, then it's more the commercial sponsors who have those multi-member state trials, but we need to enable those also for our networks of researchers. Just to give a view on the kind of trials that are ongoing at the moment. So this is out of those that I've referred to. 63 involve anti-malarials, 25 in combination with other products, 41 monoclonal antibodies, 18 cardiovascular in particular, anticoagulants, 17 combinations, and so on down the list. I won't go all the way down. You can see 11 vaccines there. I have to emphasize these are the number of clinical trials, not the number of vaccines. So there are 11 clinical trials on vaccines currently ongoing and authorized. But quite a range, and of course in the vaccine area we would hope to see some further increase. But what it illustrates is this is a multifactorial disease, and the therapeutic response will also have to be multifactorial. And lastly then, just to emphasize for researchers, for those of you in the audience who may have research activities or may wish to find more information about the possibilities, the European Commission has launched what it calls a one-stop shop for coronavirus research and innovation funding. And as the quote from Maria Gabriel, the Commissioner for Innovation Research, said during this challenging period, it's important to stand united and coordinate our response to the coronavirus pandemic. The new ERA, so that's European Research Area Corona Platform, is a one-stop shop for coronavirus-related information on research and innovation funding. So you can go to the link there, and hopefully some of you will be able to find more useful information. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Fergus. Very clear. I think it clearly shows the level of activity which is going on in such a short timeline. And maybe we can go directly to the presentation from Xavier, which complements this one. Xavier Kurz is the head of data of analytics work stream at the agency, and she will supplement the input from Fergus, focusing more on real world data. So Xavier, the floor is yours.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Do you hear me well?
Yes, very well.
Okay, thanks. So what I'm going to present is the activities that we are doing in relation to observational studies on the use of medicines, and this work is performed within the Data Analytics and Methods Task Force. Next slide. So as you may remember, as very soon after the start of the pandemic, next slide please, there had been a number of research questions that arose regarding the use of medicines and the impact of some medicines in relation to the risk of COVID-19 infection or the risk of higher, more severe outcome of the infection. So we very soon started to contact research group in Europe to collect information on the observational studies that were performed in relation to medicines use and the risk and the severity of COVID-19 infection. And we then had a very quick and good response from the research group, and we organized a number of teleconferences, but we also built a tracking table of the studies that are finalized, ongoing, and planned. And this is a tracking table that is continuously updated. By last week, we had in this table 111 studies performed in 17 EU countries and a number of countries outside the EU. 42 of these studies are now finalized, and these include studies on the association of ACE inhibitors and RRBs on the risk of COVID-19 infection, on its severity, on NSAIDs, hydroxychloroquine, lopinavir, ritonavir, ribavirin, azithromycin, and so on. And 53 studies ongoing, also including studies on a number of drugs, medicines, and other studies planned or under discussion that some studies are still looking for funding. Based on this information, we are keeping a rolling review of results of observational studies that are finalized. So we are looking at these studies, screening the results, and then we are keeping a summary of all the information per classes of product in order to support regulatory evaluation, the EMEA task force, and the committees. Next slide. We also have encouraged our researchers to register their studies with the study protocol and the result in the EU PAST register. And this is a tool to exchange information, increase the collaboration for multinational studies, and support the use of common protocols. And this EU PAST register is open, it is publicly available, and if you are using it, you can go on the NCEP website, go to EU PAST register, and in the field title of study you write COVID, and we ensure that all the titles include this term COVID, and therefore you have directly access to all the studies that are registered. Currently there are 40 studies that are registered. This was last week. This is very important, we think, to increase the collaborations, because many of the studies that were very quickly initiated in hospitals or in small centers were initiated in a single center, in a single hospital, and many of these studies do not have the number of patients large enough to draw good conclusions. So having collaborations will allow to have more impact, to give more impact to this research work. Next slide. Next one. We also have launched studies project that are funded by the EMA, and the first one is to build an infrastructure for COVID-19 vaccine monitoring and specific studies when they'll be available. So this structure, this system is established in order to complement the routine pharmacovigilance system through the spontaneous reporting, and also to complement the information that will be made available through clinical trials. But we would like to have a system in place and in order to be able to perform studies and to monitor the safety and effectiveness of vaccine very quickly and immediately. So this contract has been signed actually on the 20th of May, and so it is starting now. It includes also to develop a list of adverse events of special interest and measure the background rates of these events in the same population, so that it will be possible to quickly assess whether the number of reports that will be received are coherent, are expected in relation to the prevalence rate or incidence rate. There will be also a number of templates of study protocols that will be developed in order to speed up initiation and conduct of studies in a collaborative manner. The second project is the framework for multi-center collaboration for multi-center observational studies. As I said, there are many small studies, single centers and single hospitals that have started studies. So this project is to bring together these observational studies that are going now, that can be done, and also to facilitate the access of the data to external researchers for multi-center studies. This will also include template of study protocols and large multi-center proof of concepts observational study on topic to be defined. And this project will start mid of July. And then we are in the pipeline study on pregnancy and so on the effect of COVID-19 infection and its treatments on pregnancy outcomes. This will give information on the utilization and effect of medicines during pregnancy, in pregnancy, and the effect on birth outcome and on neonates. This will help them to take decisions, for example, on deciding on the indication of vaccines. Do we need to use vaccines in pregnancy and so on? Next slide. We have a discussions also with the International Coalition of Medicines Regulatory Agencies, ICMRA, and it has been very agreed to initiate collaboration for a pregnancy study, so again to have a better understanding of the natural history of COVID-19 in pregnancy and of pregnancy outcome and the effect of neonates on neonates, to monitor the use of pregnancy, and this will support regulatory decision making on the use of therapeutics and vaccines. This study is rather broadly accepted at the level by regulators. There will be also a building of international cohort facilitating multi-center observational studies. This is a project that may be coordinated by Health Canada, and then a preparation for vaccine safety monitoring, again to have a system ready to rapidly access up-to-date data on vaccination coverage, safety and effectiveness. So this project will develop and try to agree on methods for vaccine safety monitoring. Next slide. And then this is the last slide. We also have initiated activities in relation to the European Network of Centers for Pharmacoepidemiology and Pharmacovigilance, so NCEP. The mandate of NCEP has been strengthened in the context of the COVID pandemic in order to strengthen the capacity of the centers to facilitate access to high-quality data and analysis to support research and regulatory decisions in relation to the COVID-19 pandemic, to support collaborations, and to improve regulatory science by promoting use and dissemination of valid and reliable methodologies. And this is work on which work is ongoing now. A specific group has been created, NCEP COVID-19 Response Group, and it is now identifying and prioritizing activities on data access, collaboration, funding, and methodologies. And this is my last slide. Thank you. Next slide. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Xavier and Fergus. So I think it's very clear, and again, a lot going on, a lot of activity, and I think as you well highlighted the need for coordination in order to make a proper impact here. So we had two questions before I give the floor to Uli. Uli, you wanted to make a question to Fergus, so would you like to talk?
Yes. Well, first of all, thanks to both speakers. I think this was extremely informative. I put my questions to Fergus also in the chat. I think the most important question is, if you look at the number of studies going on in single countries, which are probably kind of pilot studies, but involve in a recurrent way always the same or similar substances, it will be important to coordinate these pilot trials and then move them to a higher European level. Is there a role for EMA to coordinate or select some of these trials? Because I think otherwise we'll be stuck again with local trials.
So hello, Uli. Can you hear me?
Yes, we hear you, Fergus.
Good. Thank you. So yes, indeed, EMA is working with the European Commission and member states to enable the establishment of networks of researchers and to promote the use of larger trials. Obviously, as regulators, we're a little bit on the receiving end of those who conduct the trials, but within the ERA versus Corona Action Plan of the European Commission, there are 4 working groups on clinical trials, testing and diagnostics, manufacturing, and funding. And in the clinical trials part of that, where Marco Cavalieri, who will present shortly, and he will refer to this also, is a participant. One of the activities is to see how we can build up networks across member states so that the wider participation of researchers and therefore more effective participation of participants whether COVID-19 patients or healthy people in the case of vaccines can be from. And obviously, there are two quite different kinds of research groups. I see in your questions you asked, what do I consider a large trial? I think obviously there are some trials which are small by design and necessary in very early development, but as we build up and start to look to observe treatment effects or vaccine effects, we need large numbers of patients, but also we need research centers who are ready to participate, because as we know, the wave of infection and the level of infection varies across member states at different times, and therefore the opportunities for participants to join trials will adjust geographically, and we need the research networks to be ready as well to include participants when they can. We also need for the studies repurposing medicines which are already on the market for other reasons, that in a number of cases they will need good numbers of patients to detect the effects of treatments which may not be large but may be helpful in particular populations or particular groups of patients. So we need larger numbers to also achieve that. And I see lastly then you asked how many regular trials have been stopped during the pandemic. I don't have the numbers on my fingertips yet. I think what has primarily happened in Europe is that trials have slowed down in those areas where lockdown is in effect, and obviously that's quite expensive. Hopefully most of them will be able to pick up again and have been focusing on the treatment of patient participants already within those trials. But certainly it's had an impact, and probably also researchers not starting trials that they might have started in this time period otherwise, and that of course we're less aware of.
Yeah, thank you very much. I answered my questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have a few more questions, but we are going to maybe now go back to the presentation from Marco, because we have now him on the room, but also because I understand his availability is limited, so may have to go. So maybe we go back to the presentation from Marco, and then we take additional questions on both Marco's presentation and the one on research from Fergus and Xavier. So I give the floor to Marco, who is going to update that on treatments and vaccines which are under development. Marco is the head of biological health threats and vaccine strategy workstream at the agency. Thank you, Marco.
Thank you, Juan, and good afternoon to all of you. Next slide. I will start talking a little bit about the therapeutic approaches here for COVID-19, and probably, as you are very much aware, at the beginning the focus was essentially into figuring out which kind of antiviral agent could be used for treating what in essence is an acute viral infection, and a lot of drugs have been repurposed that had potentially activity also against coronaviruses. Lopinavir, ritonavir has been one, but also remdesivir, which initially was developed for Ebola and Nipah virus, have been also tested here. And I will tell you more about the remdesivir later. But also what it came out very clearly that this disease is rather complex and can be even divided into different stages, in which from an early phase in which the viral replication is the predominant factor, then it moves into a situation in which the host inflammatory response tends to be the most critical aspect in how the disease advances, and this can be also divided into a pulmonary phase and an hyperinflammation phase. But the bottom line is that in this kind of scenario, it's also important to consider different agents than pure antivirals, and that's why a number of other agents that have an immunomodulatory effect have been used and are undergoing clinical trials right now. It would be very important really to understand if this could be of help. But what really is emerging, that probably will need, several interventions running either in parallel or in sequence in order to be able to have an impact in terms of outcome for the patient with the severe COVID-19. So it's important that we think now this disease not just from a pure virological perspective. Next slide. And to add to the complexity, another important factor and one of the potentially one of the most likely cause of death in many of these patients is what happened at the level of the alveoli in the vasculature around the alveoli, and in particular this pulmonary intravascular coagulopathy, which has been seen in many cases and after autopsies, really shows the importance of making sure that we address this aspect as well. Essentially, this is coming from the fact that the pro-inflammatory mediators that are released in the alveolar space then get into the microvasculature, and they cause this clot formation and vascular rupture and hemorrhage that then are leading to death in a number of cases. So that's why another layer of treatment that now is considered and is undergoing clinical trials is the use of anticoagulants. There are studies ongoing right now with the various heparins preparation and also other anticoagulants. Will be very important to see indeed how best to use this therapeutic approach as well. Next slide. Fergus already mentioned what's going on in terms of clinical trials, and this slide is showing you what is happening with the top 15 interventions that have been undergoing clinical trials since the start of this pandemic, and you can clearly see that there is a huge amount of different combination, different studies ongoing. It's extremely chaotic and very difficult to see where we're going with all these small studies. So here reiterating the importance of having large trials that will be able to tell us as rapidly as possible what is the benefit risk of all these different interventions as soon as possible, so that this can inform clinical practice and make sure what are the drugs that could be used or should be used as standard of care for treating this patient. So that's why also we need to go behind the national borders and making sure that we have really the ability of coming together into joint protocol that have the capacity of reaching different countries in the European Union, but also behind. As you know, now the virus is not spreading a lot in Europe and is going mainly in the southern hemisphere. So it's important that we have way really of exporting these protocols and making sure that they are as global as possible so that they can be operational where the cases are. And this will be the only way to generate the evidence that we need. Next slide. And these are the large clinical trials that are ongoing. You probably have already heard about them. The first one, Discovery, is run by INSERM. Now, the 750 patients were a few days ago, and the trial is still going on, essentially in France, but also Luxembourg. And the idea is to open the study also in other European countries like Germany and Portugal. DSMB look at the result of the first 600 patients in the study and also put on hold hydroxychloroquine for the time being, following the Lancet publication that, again, you are all aware of. The other important one is the Solidarity trial, which is run by WHO. This is truly a global study going all over the globe. Now, I think they are behind 3,000 patients recruited, and they had also problems with hydroxychloroquine. Indeed, the inclusion of the hydroxychloroquine in the study is put on hold for the time being while waiting for a review from the DM and TMC, and only after that it will be possible to understand if recruitment with hydroxychloroquine can be restarted. The third one is a study ongoing just in the UK, which is called Recovery, but interestingly enough, they've been able to recruit more than 10,000 patients since the start of the pandemic, so they've been extremely efficient, and this is showed, the value of having just one small study ongoing and taking away all the other smaller one that will just increase the noise and will not bring useful information. So So this study has a several arms, and one of these arms is hydroxychloroquine with a high dose, the same as used in Solidarity. So far, they've not encountered major problems, so the study is still going on, and we hope that will tell us a little bit about all the various intervention testing here. Probably the one most of interest are indeed Kaletra and hydroxychloroquine. They have not been tested remdesivir or other innovative drugs in this study so far, but now they enter into a phase with a secondary randomization in which tocilizumab but also convalescent plasma are included as well. Next slide. And now, in front of this problem in Europe, with this inability of coming out with large platform trials that would be informative, that the Commission with the member state jointly decided to come out with an action plan. This is called the ERA versus Corona. And here, indeed, the goal is to try to set up the basis for a clinical trial network that can run these large clinical trials that we all need. And these groups, indeed, started this activity with the goal, really, of being able to come up with something tangible in this respect, and we are all working together with the member state to make this happen. So work in progress, but of course a very important initiative. Is important that in Europe we are able to come up with something similar to what has been done in the UK and in the United States. Next slide. A few words on remdesivir. This has been the first antiviral that really showed efficacy according to a large clinical trial. This clinical trial was the one conducted by NIH against placebo, and showed that the time to recovery was around 30% faster than placebo when given remdesivir. This was highly significant, and this is the basis for the discussion that now the company is having with the CHMP in order to see if it's possible to come up with a conditional marketing authorization in the near future. Other studies have been provided, including a couple conducted by the company, and you may have just heard that they released top-line result from a study in moderate patients in which apparently 5 days resulted to be significantly better than placebo, while 10 days just missed the significance there. We will need to look at all this data and clearly understand what is the value of remdesivir, but clearly what we've seen, at least in the NIH study, can be convincing in terms of a clinical benefit of remdesivir in patients that are hospitalized with COVID-19. Next slide. A few words indeed on hydroxychloroquine. As already mentioned, this has been put on hold in some of the large trials. In some countries also has been put on hold for any kind of clinical trials or used for COVID-19. And this is based indeed on this publication from Mera and colleagues that went out on the Lancet a few days ago. This has raised a lot of issues because, well, first of all, it had also deleterious impact on the ongoing trials for post-exposure prophylaxis, and all the investigators now, they don't know what to do. Recruitment has been halted in some countries, as said, but also in the countries where it's still possible to recruit in these studies, it's not easy to recruit participants because of the increased concern raised by this paper. And this publication also raised a lot of concern from the scientific community around the quality of the data. And recently, Cochrane review did not identify mortality risk based on the entirety of the evidence that we have so far with hydroxychloroquine. So I think the verdict is not yet out, and we need to wait for this large randomized control trial before we can conclude on what hydroxychloroquine role is and whether the benefit risk is possible. So sometimes we see often too many irrational responses from authorities, governments around drugs like hydroxychloroquine. This is not helpful. We should stick to the science and wait for the results of the clinical trials. Next slide. Now, moving to vaccines very rapidly, the first question that we are always asked is when a vaccine will be available. And you can clearly see here in these slides that while normally this process takes 10, 15 years and every step in the development process of a vaccine is done sequentially. Here, what is attempted is try to do everything in parallel. So to compress the development time frame massively and in an unprecedented way in order to come up with a vaccine possibly in a year from now or even earlier. You may have heard that some companies are really moving very fast in this race, and they're still hoping that they will be able to generate efficacy data over the summer so that before the end of the year they can be deployed. And also in terms of manufacturing, starting scaling up at risk the manufacturing of vaccines that we don't know yet whether they work and whether they are safe. But this is where we are. And of course also for regulators is a bit of a challenge, because we have to continuously discuss with the developers to try to make sure that we are not cutting too many corners, that we are moving ahead as rapidly as possible, but not at all cost, and making sure that indeed, safety and efficacy of participants in trial is fully protected, and that we are doing this process in a way that that will provide us the information that we need. Next slide. In terms of vaccines, there is really a variety of platforms that are under consideration. As you see here on this slide, the viral vector and the nucleic acid, particularly the messenger RNA, are more prominent than others, particularly because they are some of the most advanced vaccines that we have right now are based on these technologies. These are very interesting technology. With the viral vector, we had the experience with Ebola, just to say. For mRNA vaccine, actually, we never really authorized so far a vaccine for human use, so it will be very important that we move fast, but also taking care that we got all the information on the safety that we require based on the fact that this is a new technology that so far is not raising major problems. But of course, we have to be quite careful and vigilant. Other technologies are also considered, like protein-based, a huge amount of vaccines in development, but those are a little bit behind, and we still don't know whether we'll have the same potential of protection as viral vector or nucleic acid. So we are working with all the developers, making sure that they are advancing as rapidly as possible, but also giving us information on benefit risk in a timely manner. Next slide. And this is just, showing around the globe what is going on in terms of clinical trials. And as said, there are vaccines that are already in phase 1 clinical studies, both in the United States, in Europe, and in the Far East. Some are moving into phase 2 study, like the one from the University of Oxford, also Moderna in the United States with the messenger RNA vaccine. They are planning to move into phase 2 very soon. And we know that also at least one of the Chinese vaccines are already started phase 2 studies. Next slide. So again, also here, the importance of large randomized clinical trials has to be acknowledged, and it's very important that these studies are large enough in order to generate evidence with respect to the protected level and give us information on the safety, including the potential of enhancement of disease, which is something that is still very theoretical, and the animal models so far have not shown what was a potential signal emerging from MERS and SARS. So that's in a way could be good news, but it's a bit too early to say. So that's why we have to be cautious and waiting for large clinical trials to tell us whether this risk of enhancement of disease is real or not. And here on this slide, you see what is the proposal from the WHO. Similarly to Therapeutics, they are setting up a large platform trial that is aiming of recruiting different vaccines at the same time, using the same control in different centers around the globe in order to demonstrate the protective level of this vaccine and their safety in different patient populations. Is still working in progress, but is an important initiative, and similar initiatives are taking place in the United States and in Europe. We are discussing what can be the added value of a clinical trial network in Europe, and what could be, the goals of any clinical trials that is attempted in Europe, thinking also of generating evidence that could be complementary to what is planned in the United States and in other parts of the world. Next slide. Very important point, as I alluded before, is vaccine production. This could be the Achilles heel of the vaccine problem, because the demand will be massive. We may need billions of doses very rapidly, and we know that this is really a challenge. It would require building new factories for new technologies that will have a lot of new potential issues emerging. So we have to be very careful here, but again, moving very fast in making sure that these manufacturing sites are built up as soon as possible, and including the potential risk associated with putting money into platforms that maybe at the end of the day will not deliver, either because they will be ineffective or not sufficiently effective, or because of safety concern. But still, we don't have the luxury of time here, and we have to move very fast. And as you clearly see here from statement from the companies like the Merck one, companies are tasked with creating new vaccines in 10th of the time and must manufacture it at 1,000 times the scale. So the challenge is clearly there, but all governments, all public health authorities are aware of these issues, and we are working with the private sector in order to make sure that we will do the best we can to have sufficient amount of doses once vaccine will show to be safe and effective. Next slide. And just, as my final slide, just a summary of what is going on at the EMA. So far, we had 115 therapeutics discussed with us, 33 vaccines with whom we had some conversations. Some are going for rapid scientific advices, and that is a very important first step to engage informally with the EMA, but we are ready also to provide input even in a faster way and as needed. We do recognize how it's important to have this continuous dialogue, so that this is the only way that we can make sure that they are going in the right direction, and again keeping in mind speed, but also making sure that again the risks are not unacceptable. We discussed a little bit about remdesivir before, and now this is a CHMP, and PDCO agreed a pediatric investigational plan, and now CHMP will have to receive a submission for conditional marketing authorization, and the idea is then to come up very rapidly with an opinion in case the data provided by the company will be sufficiently convincing as we would like to see. And also to mention that we don't have any emergency use authorization at the EMA level, so a kind of emergency use authorization similar to the US FDA that would be applicable to all the member states. This is a bit of a gap in the European legislation, and is left to decision at the level of the member states. But this could raise some problem because such provision is present in different countries in different ways, and potentially would increase also the imbalance and inequality in access to remdesivir. So that's why we're trying to see what can be done at the European level in order to have a tool like the American one that can help Europe come out with an opinion that is shared by all the member states and will put everybody on the same page. We already discussed chloroquine and hydroxychloroquine. We will be continuing monitoring the benefit risk based on the emerging evidence, and hoping that the clinical trials that are ongoing will deliver as soon as possible, so that we know the benefit risk of these drugs both in prevention and treatment. And lastly, but very importantly, we have intense international collaboration both with FDA, WHO, with ICMRA, and also with our colleagues in the European Commission to move ahead the agenda on vaccines and therapeutics as rapidly and as effectively as possible. And I will stop here. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Marco, for the comprehensive overview. And we have a few questions which have been written. I will read them for you. But for example, Charlotte Rofiaen from EFA was asking how are we going to convince the citizens that the vaccines which are developed in such a short period of time as compared to the usual 10 years time frame are sufficiently safe. And I don't know, you want to comment on that, Marco, already?
Yes, and this is the reason why, we don't want to cut corners. We want to make sure that since the pandemic is still out and it's possible to conduct large phase 3 trials, these are done as rapidly as possible, and that's why we're engaging with the developers, but also with the international regulators and WHO in order to be aligned in demanding such studies. And I think once we will have evidence from this large phase 3 trial, everybody will be much more reassured around the benefit risk of these products, and we can go ahead with large vaccination campaigns. The problem will arise if the pandemic wanes and these phase 3 studies will not be feasible. So we have to be prepared that in that kind of scenario, we have to think about what to do and what kind of evidence can be gathered in order to reassure regulators first in making the decision, but also public health authorities and citizens all over the globe in that the vaccine has a positive benefit risk. So we are also discussing this kind of scenario because I think we have to be prepared. But to start with, we are demanding these large studies.
Thank you. That's quite clear. I think hopefully this message is well delivered. That we are not cutting corners. We are not lowering our requirements and our standards. And I think an element here which will be important will be also transparency in order to allow people to see that the evidence is there backing the benefit risk recommendation. Daniel Sereni from Internal Medicine is asking whether, in addition to remdesivir, are there any other medicine which is currently asking for an authorization against COVID-19?
No, we don't.
You want to take it, Marco?
Yes, we don't have any other medicine that has a request in authorization, and unfortunately, we don't have really other therapeutics that so far have demonstrated efficacy in large randomized controlled trials.
And I think it's clear that if any new medicine comes, we will keep everyone informed and we will keep all this network informed. So yeah, for the time being, that's what we have. I think Jan De Belli from PU was asking about the impact that the current situation will have on the availability of the flu vaccine in the next season, in the 2020-21 flu season. Can you comment on that, Marco?
Yes, we are monitoring this very carefully, but what we're seeing so far that most of the developers engaging here in this race for COVID-19 vaccines are not necessarily the same one that are providing most of the influenza vaccine all over the world. So in principle, this is rather reassuring because it means that there will be no competition for the developers to, put efforts into the COVID-19 versus influenza. But of course, we have to be, very careful because this is very dynamic. Things may change very rapidly, and you have seen some of the large companies that at the beginning were very hesitant in jumping into the race for a COVID-19 vaccine. Now, slowly, they are all entering into that. So we will have to see exactly what could be the impact here. But for the time being, because we're talking about different companies and different manufacturing sites, it does not appear to be a big issue for the moment, but something to be monitored.
Thank you. We have Roland Pochet, who is a question. I mean, it was covered in the presentation, but maybe you can clarify this aspect about our opinion about the use of chloroquine for COVID-19, and if you want to maybe clarify that point again.
Yes, of course, Juan. And our position with hydroxychloroquine is that we know that it has some safety aspects that need to be, monitored carefully, and particularly the cardiac toxicity is the one of major concern. But when it comes to use in the context of COVID-19, we still don't know if the benefit risk is positive. And in order to understand that, we need these large randomized controlled trials that will be the only tool possible to tell us indeed if they are working or not and whether it's safe to use them in this patient population.
Thank you very much. I think there are a few more questions, but I think these were more related to Fergus and Xavier on clinical trials. So because I understand that Marco may have to leave, anyone else would like to talk or to make any question that maybe is more directly to, we have some from Donald Singer, who is asking, in the light of current progress on vaccines development and trials, what is the current estimate of timelines for an approved vaccine? This is covered already, sorry. I think Ansela is asking, but I think it's an observational study. So is there anything else on Marco? Yeah, I mean, Lily Cannon is asking, how safe will these vaccines be for special populations like thalassemia, as for example?
of course, this is very difficult to say for the time being. We have, to build our understanding of the safety profile step by step, and that's why, we're waiting for the result from the phase 1 studies in order to start with, and then, progressively build on that in order to have a clearer picture on the safety of these vaccines.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm seeing as well some comments regarding supporting or full transparency, and I think we already made some statements publicly that, of course, we are looking at. I mean, the agency is fully committed to transparency, and we are very much aware that in the case of COVID, this requires a special consideration. So. Okay, so I think maybe we can take some of the questions regarding the previous presentations, and I think we have one question about from Beuk, from Ansela, who was asking about the results of observational studies, whether they will be published or how this is going to be made publicly available. And maybe I guess Xavier could take this. Are you there, Xavier? We can hear Xavier. So maybe, I don't know, Fergus, would you like to comment, or Peter, if it's would like to comment about how information on observational studies will be made available? Yes, Peter, please.
Hi, this is Fergus. Certainly the EMA has the EU PASS register, which is a post-authorization safety study register, where researchers are very definitely encouraged, and in case there are studies which have been imposed by the regulator, are required to post both their protocols and subsequently the results. And in the broad sense, I think it's very clear that early sharing of clinical trial results is very important, because by sharing that knowledge, all of the research can move forward more quickly. It avoids people going down dead ends which have already been explored, but on the other hand, can also help to fine-tune the use of products which show promise and the particular phases of disease in which they're best used. So yes, transparent. We will be reaching out to all sponsors of trials registered in EudraCT. Also, we've been reaching out to ask them to post the results as soon as they can, and not at the limits of the time period, but as early as they're able to.
Was mentioning that, what about the sustainability of the platforms and initiatives which are described by Fergus and Xavier? We need to solve the crisis and to be prepared for any next one. So regarding patient involvement in research, prioritization, coordination of the trials, prioritization of the population to be treated or vaccinated in case of a short supply, how this will be decided, and how citizens and patients and organizations will have a word to say on that. Maybe I give the floor to Fergus.
So, hi Juan, François. For the platforms and initiatives described by myself and by Xavier, clearly I was talking about interventional clinical trials, whereas Xavier was talking about observational studies looking at data already in databases. So in both those cases, it's clear that there's a need for funding and for infrastructural initiatives. And as myself and Marco referred to, one of the key focus areas within the EU for these discussions is the ERA versus Corona action, which is being taken by member states and Commission, and where EMA participates. And we're looking very closely at what can be done to build the networks of researchers and make them sustainable. And I know also, if Xavier or Peter are able to join the line, that there are significant initiatives also ongoing in building up databases, but also research groups and tools to access these large observational cohorts of information. And I see Peter's posted some there, and we've indeed established an investigation already with Utrecht University to look at how to build up the methodology for this for vaccines later on, and clearly through other initiatives for other kinds of products as well. It'd be nice if Xavier or Peter were able to join the line. They could say a bit more about that.
I don't know if you hear me now.
Yeah, we can.
It's the three projects that I've discussed, which have been launched by the EMA, are exactly that: is to build a framework and to build an infrastructure in order to create a sustainable platform. And this is, for example, for vaccines, that and these platforms should then be in place by December, so that at least before the vaccines are available. And also for the observational studies, this is to create a framework, a system that external researchers could access, and they will then have access to data from several hundreds of millions of patients in many European countries. So this is really the objective of these projects.
Thank you very much, Xavier, for the clarification. And I mean, as Peter has said, he makes reference to, in terms of transparency of observational studies, he makes reference to the EU PASS register as a key tool for making this information available to the public. Okay, so I understand, I think we have covered most of them. I think there might be a few questions that otherwise we can, I think as well, Jose Raúl were asking about ethnic background, whether there is any difference which has been seen in the different trials about higher mortality. I don't know if we are able to comment on that at this stage already, Fergus.
So I think it's I'm not sure if Marco is still online. He could maybe answer a little bit more, but it's clear from published data that the impact of the disease in different populations appears to show differences. Whether that would also be reflected in the effectiveness of different medicines or vaccines, I don't think there's any information to suggest that or to contradict that at the moment. But prevalence of disease and of disease severity does appear to vary from what we can see, and that probably is multifactorial in itself.
Yeah, I guess that more and more information will come up, and hopefully we can communicate that properly in due time. But yeah.
And again, the importance of very large trials, so that there are representative groups from different backgrounds, different ages, different ethnic backgrounds, different concomitant disease that can inform this kind of things that might target therapies in a different way.
Yeah, indeed. This is another call for larger trials so that we can have proper conclusions and good data. Thank you. I understand now we have been able to connect properly with Peter, so I would give the floor to him, just if you want Peter to complement, or even if many of the things have been said. No, but I think we can't hear. So maybe I'm just taking the last question, which it was from Roland Pochet, who was asking about the transparency of the clinical trials which are involved. I mean, maybe Fergus, you also want to comment on that, and how everyone can check and can look at what's ongoing in terms of clinical trials in the EU database.
Thank you, Juan. So on our EMA website, you can find links to both the EU Clinical Trial Register, where the code COVID-19 is used to indicate clinical trials on COVID therapeutics or vaccines, and similarly for the EU PASS register, there is a small instruction on how to insert the COVID-19 code in the search tool to give you information on COVID-19 related observational studies. We are strongly encouraging researchers to make the results of those trials available as early as possible, not waiting for the 6 months or 1 year time frame that is the outer limit, but really to get that out as quickly as possible. And in the guidance I referred to in my talk, in the introduction, it also references the International Committee of Medical Journal Editors, who've made very clear that, especially for these public health emergencies, making information on the results available early through registers or other purposes will not be seen as pre-publication. So there isn't a competition, if you like, or a fear that putting information out there will interfere with publication in the future. So it's really important that researchers, and we are, for those trials in the EU Clinical Trial Register, we're reaching out and emailing to the sponsors to remind them and encourage them.
Juan, it's Peter here. Am I finally unmuted?
So please go ahead.
So I think most of the things have already been
very timely.
Yeah, well, very briefly. I think it was striking listening to Fergus's and then Xavier's presentation on how actually the challenges were the same across both clinical trials and observational research, and that is the need for collaboration between research groups, the need for high quality in the design of studies and selection of data, the need for large size in order to have the power to detect issues, and obviously the need for transparency. The questions relating to transparency of observational research, it's not the same situation for observational compared to clinical trials, because clinical trials by law have to be registered and then the results also submitted into the European database and made public. It's not the same for observational research. What I can say is that the European Union Post-Authorization Study, or EU PAS Register, is a key tool in supporting observation for both the existence of observational studies, protocols and results. All EMA-supported research will have high levels of transparency accorded to it, as will research funded by the European Union, but that doesn't mean that there might not be some work going on by academia or industry on observational studies that is not in the public domain. We'll encourage it, but we can't exclude that. Over.
Thank you, Peter, very much. And I think it concludes. And I think definitely we have to fully agree. There are so many good examples why it's so important collaboration. In order to, we have never been faced with a situation we have to be so fast and to deliver fast. Unless we are able to coordinate, it will be very difficult to have an impact. So I would like to thank you, Fergus, Xavier, and Peter and Marco for the good overview and all the questions that we have more or less managed to answer. The rest we will follow up in writing. And I think we need to now move on to the next part of the agenda. And I think we are going to now talk about availability of medicines during the pandemic and the impact that the pandemic is having on it and how the network is trying to react and cover that. So we have with us Monica Diaz. And Monica is Policy and Crisis Coordinating Officer in the agency and is leading all the coordination activities on this area. So Monica, I give you the floor to go through this. Thank you very much.
Hello, good afternoon to you all. Can you hear me?
Very well, Monica.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. I thought I had a problem with my microphone. So thank you to you all, and I would like to give you an overview of the activities of the agency in relation to securing availability of medicines across the EU during the pandemic. Next slide, please. So, as you know, improving availability of medicines is been a key priority for the European Medicines Regulatory Network for a while. But also it is important to bear in mind that most medicine shortages are actually dealt with at national level by the NCAs. Now, since this is an old problem, not a new problem with COVID, it just became even greater problem during the COVID pandemic. The European Medicines Regulatory Network established in December of 2016 a task force on availability of authorized medicines. And it was done in order to give a strategic support and provide advice on how to tackle supply disruptions of both human and veterinary medicines to ensure they are continually available for patients in Europe and for animals, of course. There are many outputs of the task force, and there's a session dedicated to that. I won't go into detail, but perhaps important to refer to one of the main outputs of the task force was the establishment in April 2019 of a single point of contact, a network, to improve information sharing between member states, EMA and European Commission. So now what we have is a single point of contact in each national competent authority, as well as European Medicines Agency and European Commission. And they are in charge of sharing information in relation to shortages, in particular for critical human and veterinary medicines. This exchange of information has been very beneficial for the NCAs in order to deal with shortages, manage them, and trying to, as much as possible, mitigate the impact of shortages, and if at all possible, also prevent them. This information sharing also includes sharing information about alternative medicines that may be available in other member states. Now, in the context of the COVID pandemic, what have we seen as the main root causes of shortages? Well, we've seen that lockdowns of manufacturing sites have been one of the reasons for shortages of medicines. Also, the travel restrictions that were impacting exports of medicines. Export bans that were imposed by some member states, as well as, for instance, we have the case of the Indian government that imposed an export ban on 14 APIs. Another main root cause of the shortages in the context of the COVID pandemic was an enormous increase in demand for medicines that were used in COVID patients. Last but not least, also we've seen there was stockpiling by consumer-driven stockpiling, so by individual citizens at member state level and in some hospitals as well. In terms of the products that we see that were in shortage or risk of shortage as a result of COVID, of course, medicines that were used off-label for the treatment of COVID. So we have your hydroxychloroquine, chloroquine, monoclonal antibodies, and also medicines used in intensive care units, anesthetics, antibiotics, analgesics, sedatives. So how has the agency responded to the COVID pandemic? So the agency is going beyond its legal remit and has initiated a number of activities. So the EMA set up what is called the EU Executive Steering Group on Shortages of Medicines caused by major events. And this group meets on a weekly basis, also with industry associations, and I'll get into more detail in the next slides. Also, immediately at the end of March, we launched a survey to all MAHs to try to ascertain the impact of the COVID pandemic on the availability of centrally authorized products. Unfortunately, we didn't have a very good response rate to this survey, only 50%. And for those products where the MAHs indicated that there would be anticipated shortages, we are liaising with them and trying to see how can we mitigate or at all prevent these shortages from occurring. And last but not least, and very importantly, EMA launched the industry POC system in April of this year, which is a fast-tracking monitoring system that hopefully will prevent and mitigate supply issues as well during the COVID pandemic. And this is a dedicated system only that was set up only in the context of COVID. So now going back to the EU Executive Steering Group on Shortages. So it consists of representatives from EMA, from the European Commission, from HMA. So we have 7 heads of agencies in the EU Executive Steering Group, as well as the chairs of the CMDH and CMDV and risk communication specialists. The group is chaired by the European Commission. As I mentioned, it meets with industry. It was meeting on a weekly basis until now, and now we've changed the frequency to every 2 weeks or once a month. The aim of the EU Executive Steering Group is to provide leadership for urgent and coordinated actions so that we can prevent or mitigate shortages within the EU during the pandemic. So if I move on to the next slide. Now, just going back to the single point of contact network. So this is the EU single point of contact. So these are the network that consists of member states, so NCAs, EMA, and European Commission. That was set up in April of 2019. What has the EU SPOC done during the pandemic? Well, it continues sharing information on critical medicine shortages in the context of COVID, but it went a little bit beyond just the sharing of shortages of critical medicines. We've gathered information on medicines that were used for COVID patients in the ICU setting, that the member states were aware of current shortages or anticipated shortages. And then this information is used by the European Commission Health Commissioner to make a plea to industry to increase production for these medicines. So we did this at the end of March, when we saw that there was an increase in shortages of these ICU medicines. So we made a list of those that were already in shortage or at risk of shortage, and the Commissioner sent a letter on the 3rd of April to industry associations, which subsequently provided this letter to pharmaceutical companies in order to increase production for those medicines listed there. In addition, and due to the export restrictions that I mentioned imposed by the Indian government, we've also collected demand data from member states, as mentioned through the NCA SPOCs, for these 14 APIs that were under export restrictions. And this information that was used again by the Health Commissioner in a direct negotiations with the Indian government in trying to lift those export restrictions, which, by the way, now have been most of them lifted. Perhaps hydrochloroquine is the only one, hydroxychloroquine is the only that might still be under export restriction. Now, the iSPOC system. So the industry SPOC system was set up as a request from pharmaceutical industry. As I mentioned, is for reporting shortages of COVID medicines only, a subset of medicines that are used in the ICU setting. A total of 31 medicines. And the setting up of this iSPOC system was also discussed and agreed by the EU Executive Steering Group, and it was launched in April, as I mentioned. So this is a direct communication between industry and EU regulatory authorities. So what happens is the MAGs, they report directly to EMA shortages for crucial centrally authorized products as well as NAP. So this is the new item here, is that we receive direct notifications from industry for caps and naps used in the context of COVID. This is, of course, done in parallel to the ongoing reporting of shortages by MAHs to NCAs concerned, so affected by the particular shortages. We have a single point of contact in the pharmaceutical companies, and that's why it's called industry SPOC. So we have one single person in a pharmaceutical company that addresses all issues for the entire portfolio for that particular MAH. So the aim of the iSPOC is to collect information on current and anticipated shortages, and as well as the root causes, as I mentioned, in relation to these subsets of medicines used for COVID patients, primarily used in ICU setting. And the aim here is, of course, preventing shortages from occurring. And this is done by initiating actions through the EU Executive Steering Group to address the root causes that are listed by the companies, or also to enable any mitigating actions. For instance, this can be regulatory flexibility, and I will get to that in one of my next slides, or actions that can be done at the level of the European Commission, for instance, in relation to export bans that are imposed by some member states, or indeed at the level of the member states as well, and that those actions can then enable mitigate the shortages. So just this slide is to try to despite the difference between the EU SPOC network and the industry SPOC network. So as I mentioned, within the EU SPOC network, so we have regulators and European Commission. We have notification of critical shortages by NCA SPOCs, both to EMA and to the European Commission. Whereas with the industry SPOC network, what we have is the industry SPOCs that notify all shortages for the subsets of medicines used in the ICU setting directly to EMA and also the NCA's SPOCs of the affected member states for CAPs and NAPs. So now my last slide is what I was mentioning. One of the outputs of the executive steering group has been the agreement to releasing a regulatory flexibility in order to prevent or mitigate shortages. The first version of this notice to stakeholders, the Q&A, was published on the 10th of April, but has already been updated twice. So we have now currently version 2 for the human medicines Q&A. And we also have a question and answer that was developed for veterinary medicines. And these are a series of measures that have been put in place to be considered by MAHs when deciding what are the mitigating measures that can put in place in order to prevent shortages. This, as I mentioned, we are already in version 2 for the Q&A for human medicines, and the idea is indeed to update this notice to stakeholders frequently once we realize that there is a need for further regulatory flexibility to be put in place to help companies deal with shortages. And this is discussed, as I mentioned, at the executive steering group. Perhaps before I finalize, and this is my last slide, just to mention a little bit more about the EU executive steering group. So the discussions that take place there have now also been extended to all heads of agencies. All the conclusions of these meetings and all the information that is discussed is then sent to all heads of agencies on a weekly basis, so that the entire European medicines regulatory network is fully aware of all the discussions and the actions that are being put in place. And perhaps I stop here and I answer any questions you might have.
Thank you very much for the very clear overview, Monica. And I think we have a few questions. And I think Roland Pochet was asking basically two things. One is asking about maybe more transparency about the SPOC website, how we can increase transparency about that. And then there was a question why this iSPOC system is only for COVID-related products and doesn't apply to other medicines. And maybe you want to clarify.
Perhaps I start with the second question. So the iSPOC system was, as I mentioned, set up as a request from pharmaceutical industry, and it is a major undertaking for agency to put this system in place. So we had to start very small, and that's where we started with 31 medicines only, and that already involved around 450 MAHs and even greater number of medicinal products. So we are now trying and using an automated system to collect the information from the companies, but we had to start small. We had to start with a small set of products that we felt were the most crucial during the pandemic. And then we will see. And as I mentioned, this was set up only in the context of the COVID pandemic. As we know, and I mentioned at the start of my presentation, shortages are primarily dealt with at the level of the member states. And in fact, if we think for this first set of products, we had a small number of products that were centrally authorized. The vast majority of the products that are even in scope of this first phase of the iSPOC are nationally authorized products, and this will be the information that is sent by the iSPOC will then be dealt with by the national competent authorities. Of course, it is very important that for the first time we now have an overview at central level of all the shortages for these 31 medicines, and that is very useful information that we know the information is there because it is sent to the individual NCAs, but of course it is very important to have that centralized, and we have it now for this small set of medicines. So that is now in place, but we have to see how it goes. And of course, you can imagine in terms of resources how resource intensive this process is being, not only to set up, but then to manage as well, even though we have managed to automate it to a certain extent. Now, your second question is transparency in relation to the SPOC. I believe that perhaps you're referring to the EU SPOC network. In terms of the transparency, well, it was set up and we announced that in our website. It has been set up primarily to share information. So this is the first phase. We had a pilot last year to share information between member states on shortages, in particular shortages of critical medicines. And this has been working very well, and the member states have seen the benefit of having this system in place. We don't have yet information to put forward in our website, but we can consider what information we can consider that and take that back and discuss further internally how we can make more transparency our activities. The group meets on a monthly basis to discuss how the network is working, how we're sharing information, what sort of information that should or should not be shared, and what is being as a benefit to the member states or not. Try to simplify the process as well. So we had the pilots for 4 months, but we're still trying to fine-tune as much as possible the system, which is now primarily done via email exchanges, which is of course very resource intense for the member states and also for us to collect that information. But yes, we can take back that and see how we can perhaps be a little bit more transparent in terms of the activities of the USPOC network.
Thank you, Monica. Indeed, I think everything is moving so fast that it's difficult to catch, and I think the slides illustrate very well the complexity that we are facing in this area. I'm going to try to combine one of the questions. I mean, there are questions about the representation of patients in the EU Executive Steering Group, but also Francois is making a question whether this group has the role or the capacity to manage stocks from member states with high supply to others member states where we have less supply. And I think these two questions regarding the patients and healthcare professional representation, I don't think so there is a proper representation there in the group itself. However, what we have very much is try to have patients and healthcare professionals very much involved in the task force that we will talk later, which is not specifically on COVID. So, but I don't know, Monica, if you want to elaborate further and then talk about the responsibilities.
Yes, so perhaps in relation to the representation of patients, now we have, as you mentioned, Juan, we have industry associations, EU industry associations that have met on a weekly basis just before the main meeting of the EU Executive Steering Group. So that has been, and now we've actually reduced the frequency of these meetings. And the idea was really to liaise with industry at that point in time to try to see as much as possible what were the problems that were coming up and how could the European Regulated Medicines Network address those issues. And I think that was very valuable because we put in place, as I mentioned, the regulatory flexibility that very much helped prevent shortages from occurring. The other question you had was, could you remind me the second question?
Yeah, is the capacity of the group to manage stocks from member states with high supply to others with less supply?
Yes, we had discussions within the EU Executive Steering Group on moving stocks from member state to member state, but that is actually a difficult discussion and a difficult process. So we are now, what we are doing, which is perhaps very important, is to having discussions on how to forecast demand data in view of a second wave of the pandemic. And that's perhaps very important work that we are doing together with all member states. That's why I mentioned that the EU Executive Steering Group now composition is extended, has been extended to all heads of agencies, because we're having those discussions on forecasting demand data in view of a second wave, and so that we can ask industry to increase capacity to meet that demand. In terms of moving stocks, I think that is a rather political discussion that is very difficult. It is an important one, but it's rather political that maybe needs to be a discussion to be taken in a different forum.
Thank you, Monica. But I saw as well Noel would like to make a comment.
Yes, thank you very much, Juan and Monica. Perhaps to emphasize what Monica is saying, in the steering group, we are not really discussing moving stock from one member state to another. What we have seen, and this follows the request from the Health Commissioner Kyriakides to industry, to the trade associations to increase capacity for medicines used in intensive care units is that discussions now have started on the demand supply model. So the demand by member states and the supply provided by industry. And as Monica was referring to, I can't recollect that we have ever had these type of discussions so far. Industry has indeed increased capacity during the first wave of the medicines used in ICU setting. Now we all have to prepare for the second wave, or perhaps even a third wave if we are unlucky. So we have to see now, taking into account the experience that we have obtained, how can we further improve? And therefore, the discussions at the level of the steering group have now shifted towards what can we do in order to improve forecasting of demands at national level, acknowledging that every member state may have its own system in place. Perhaps some member states have a more sophisticated system than another member state. Here we're also trying the network to help. We have presentations by a member state, by Belgium, about the system in place at national level. We had a presentation by Denmark about the IT tool they were using. Member states seem interested in order to learn from each other. And in that respect, I think we will certainly make progress in terms of better forecasting demands in an already challenging environment. And then, of course, we have to see how we can match that in the best possible way with increased capacity, which has to be provided by industry. Over.
Thank you, Noel, for clarifying that. And I think, yeah, I think it also is true. I mean, everything has been set up and established in such a short time frame that we need to look at carefully how we are going to follow up on different activities. There was also another comment, and I think we have to move on, but there was another comment that they are, again, requesting for patients and healthcare professionals to be represented directly as they are directly impacted on shortages, either connected to COVID or another one. We fully agree, and we need to maybe explore and come up with the best formula and the most efficient way to have representatives of civil society fully involved in the process. I mean, everything is moving so fast that it's difficult to have an immediate response to that, but there will be opportunities where we will reflect how to do that in the most efficient manner. So the last one, I think, before we move to the next is Ansela is asking about the SPOC network, considering sharing information on available stock for COVID. I think hopefully this is covered. So I think maybe we will go through the questions again. And unless Monica or Noel would like to make a final remark, I think we'll move to the next element. Monica, would you like to say something else?
No, that's fine from my side. Yes, thank you very much for the questions.
Thanks to you and to Noel and all the comments and questions. And I think we move now to the last part of this session, which is focusing on communication. The elements of communication, which I think already have been raised, is an important element to keep everybody up to date and informed timely about all what's going on. And we have Melanie Carr, who is the head of Stakeholders and Communication Division at the agency, who is going to present together with Maria Hein, who is the head of the Communication Department at the agency. So I give the floor to Melanie first.
Thank you, Juan, and good afternoon, everybody. So we'd like to update you on how we've been communicating on COVID-19 and providing public health advice thus far in the pandemic. And on the next slide, this just outlines what we plan to cover in the next 15 minutes. So I will run through our approach to communication, who we're collaborating with, and then I'll hand the floor to Maria Hein, who's head of our communications department, to update you on what we've been communicating on and how we're engaging with the media. Next one. So what's been our approach to communicating during this pandemic? Next one, please. Well, overall, we endeavor to be quick, accurate, and credible in all of our communication. And by that, we mean managing and taking control of the communication, even where not all the facts are known, which has often been the case in this pandemic thus far. So we're recognizing that even if we don't communicate, someone else will, and they might not have accurate information. So we're aiming to communicate very rapidly, to build trust and quality by being honest and open. And it's important to say what we know and acknowledge what we don't know, and that we recognize. Secondly, it's about being as clear and transparent as possible and dealing proactively with complicated issues. And that includes, ensuring media access to EMA scientific experts and also EMA spokespersons when we're faced with questions from external stakeholders and the media. And finally, it's about communicating rapidly, honestly, and openly, keep updated with accurate information, and really aiming to reduce speculation. Also communicating as proactively as necessary, being responsive and non-evasive when we get queries from the media. Ensuring an efficient process for review and approval of our messages to make sure that they are accurate. And also about avoiding any unnecessary delays in communicating important information. So that's been our approach thus far. Next one, please. Very rapidly, what we did was we put in place on our corporate website a dedicated area to COVID-19. If you have not yet had the opportunity to explore these web pages, we would invite you to do so, and any comments are really welcome. Next one, please. Since our first publication at the beginning of February, the teams in our communication department and within our public engagement department have been working very hard. Next one, please. If you just click through on this slide. And what you see is that we've produced over 75 different updates since February up to now. So really are working very, very hard to try and get as much information out there as we possibly can. Next one, please. And equally behind the scenes, we've been busy. So we put in place strategy meetings with our director and our deputy director. This is really to discuss emerging trends in our rolling communication plans. We've been working to streamline our tools and processes to ensure both rapidity and accuracy. We've also been looking at reinforcing our media and social media monitoring in order so that we can regularly produce lines of take on a variety of issues as they arise, which we share not only internally but with the wider network as appropriate. Next one, please. And of course, EMA is not doing this in isolation, so who are we collaborating with? Next one, please. Well, COVID-19 is clearly a global pandemic, and it requires a coordinated global response. And we've been not only working very closely with our EU partners across the network, but also with our international regulatory partners, notably through the International Coalition of Medicines Regulatory Authorities, WHO, and with regulatory authorities in the US, Canada, Australia, and Japan, amongst others. Full information on these collaborations is available on our website. Next one. We also recognize now more than ever how important it is to engage with patient and healthcare professional organizations in order to gather critical input into crisis-related activities, to channel public health advice to patients, health professionals, and citizens, and also to anticipate, prevent, and mitigate emerging issues, and essentially reinforce the legitimacy of the actions that we're taking and the trust in the scientific outcomes in the EU system. Now, important in order to do this is that we have good methodologies in place. And as you know, EMA has an established network of patients, healthcare professionals, and academics to involve in discussions and actions so we can respond quickly to the needs identified and also to those of the network. And sincerely, we cannot thank you and your organizations enough for your active participation and your support in this process. The methodologies you're aware of, they include participation in scientific advice, committee membership, direct consultations, expert meetings, and the example earlier of the participation in the task force, for example. And in terms of the specific response to COVID-19, we've been actively disseminating all of our communications to stakeholders. We've been running information sessions, such as this one that we're running today for the working parties and other eligible organizations. We're consulting with stakeholders to increase the effectiveness of our communications. despite the constraints in timing. We'll see how we can best do that for COVID-19 community moving forward. And our team in public and stakeholder engagement are also regularly responding to queries from patients, healthcare professionals and members of the public, and have been consulting with our COVID task force to ensure that we provide the most up-to-date and informed responses. Next one, please. I think this is now where I'll pass the floor to Marie-Agnes to give you a flavour of some of the subject matter we're communicating on. Over to you, Marie-Agnes. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Melanie, and I hope you all hear me. Hello, everybody. So,
Hello,
as Melanie already mentioned, okay, great. Thanks a lot, Juan. Melanie already mentioned, I would like to go a little bit more detailed regarding the content we are communicating about. Next, please. We have structured, next please, next slide please. So a little bit in this line, we also structured our website. So we are communicating about development and evaluation of COVID-19 vaccines and therapeutics, the availability of medicines during the emergency, any public health advice we can give, and also the guidance to companies we developed. And you've heard about all these topics already, but I want to give you a few examples. Next, please. So looking at vaccines and therapeutics, we, for example, gave an overview, of a little bit the content that Marco reported on, the contacts with developers we had, the products we discussed with them, etc. Then also we provided, for example, our call, information on the call of the CHMP for large-scale clinical trials that will give us the necessary evidence to actually allow for rapid evaluation. And for example, also, information on remdesivir, our compassionate use recommendation, and the rolling review that we have already completed. Next, please. Looking at the availability of medicines during the emergency, that was a topic that Monica talked about, and which is very important also for you. We also have, had quite a lot of information. One, on the meetings of the EU Executive Steering Group. We gave regular updates as needed. Then also on the regulatory flexibility, Monica said that we just updated the Q&As here again. And as she also explained, we launched the Icebox system to actually get more information on potential issues with the supply of critical medicines. Next, please. And what we have done also more than in previous months, I think, was to provide some public health advice. And this was mainly also to respond to certain recommendations that we felt were not fully based on scientific evidence. So we have published, or we have updated recently, and reminded everyone about the risk of the use of hydroxychloroquine to treat COVID-19, as we still lack the necessary evidence. We also reported on some of the studies that Xavier talked about, whether there's any risk to use certain medicines to treat hypertension and heart failure in patients with COVID-19. And we also provided recommendations to the public on what kind of precautions to take when they buy medicines online, And we want them to be aware of fake sites and falsified medicines. Next, please. The fourth area we were talking about is the guidance to companies, because also you've heard this before from colleagues. We provided 4 tools for developers of COVID-19 vaccines and therapeutics. And we also provided guidance to companies how to deal with certain disruptions caused by COVID-19, for example, when they carry out clinical trials. Next, please. One of our main tasks is actually the interaction with the media. And why do we engage with media? Media are really a very important player in crisis situations. They convey, they allow us to convey crisis response, but also they are an important emergency information system. that we can make use of. So in this context, we respond quickly and accurately to media queries. We organize interviews with EMA experts and senior managers, and we also organize ourselves press briefings and conferences. Next, please. On 14 May, we have organized our first press briefing in the COVID-19 context with Noël Vachon, who you have heard him already, and Marco Cavalieri, who also talked today to you. It actually was a really huge success because we had, which was unprecedented, 326 unique articles published only in the first 24 hours after the briefing. And we had 23 journalists. Next, please. As many of the journalists came from major news wires, we got really huge, geographically broad coverage. Here you see some of the articles. As you can see, they focused around the optimistic forecast that we might have a vaccine in the next year. And as you can see in the next slide, please, we got coverage from the US to European countries, to South America, but also even African countries. And that, as I said before, was mainly due to the fact that we had important news wires as Reuters, Agence France Presse, and so on, among the journalists listening into our briefing. Next, please. During the past month, we have also been very active on social media, and this resulted in an increase of our engagement and impressions. For example, regarding Twitter by 45%, but also LinkedIn increased significantly. And here you can see one of our most successful social media posts during past months. One, a thank you for you, patients organizations, and the other one, thank you for you, doctors and other healthcare professionals. And these two posts have really received an enormous amount of engagement. And I wanted to take this opportunity to actually thank you for helping us to disseminate our messages, but also to strengthen reliable, trusted, and science-based information. We need you to disseminate this information and to help us really fight fake news there and make sure that only trusted information is taken into consideration when people take very important health decisions. Any questions? That's it for me.
Thank you very much, Melanie and Maria Agnes, for the very clear overview. And already we have some comments from PU, from Jean Levy, which highlights that, is welcome to receive that we have been clear and kindly providing good information on this situation. So that's very good. We also have another comment from Jose, who is asking about how EMA has been engaging with patients and healthcare professionals on the pandemic. And the main answer to that is that we are, as much as possible, trying to use the methodology and the tools which are already in place. I think most of the evaluation will be done by the committees, and patients are involved through the committees as experts, as members, scientific advice, when medicines will come for scientific advice. So we are trying as much as possible to use the current tools that we have in place, as we are doing today, to give an update on activities through the Patients and Consumers Working Party. However, again, everything is moving very fast, and we are considering whether we should go even beyond and do more. And we will come back to you and explain if there is any additional steps. But we are taking to ensure that patients and healthcare professional views are incorporated. I think there is another question from Francois, who is asking maybe a more theoretical question, but remdesivir was available on compassionate basis in Czech Republic only, and Gilead announced a global supply of 150,000 patients only. When evaluating the opinion, the compassionate use of remdesivir, did EMA consider possible tension on its supply in terms of decision making and scientific recommendations. Is the governance in place for such programs with possible controversies on the supply and who to benefit? Maybe this is not related to communication, but I mean, I don't know if someone would like to take it, but of course, I mean, when the CHMP gave an opinion on compassionate use of remdesivir, I think the added value that we have is that all member states are represented. So in principle, I think these kind of elements are taken into account. But I'm not sure whether someone Noel would like to take this forward. Noel, please.
Well, thank you. I can try. This is, of course, will be a challenge for whatever product that we will be authorizing. So when you're talking about a therapeutic or a vaccine, the issue will now take into account the current pandemic and the huge pressure that will be put on us. I mean, on everybody at the end of the day, in terms of giving an authorization or not, at what moment in time. We need robust data. There is a public health crisis. There is an economic crisis. So the pressure will be very high, and we will see now. How should I say it? Not only the aspect of giving a license or not will become an issue, but also will there be enough medicine available in order to treat whoever needs to be treated or needs to be vaccinated. Now, and these things will have to run to a certain extent in parallel, because you cannot start thinking about it once you only give an authorization. So this is, of course, not as such for the CHMP, for instance, in order to consider, but of course there will be parallel discussions in terms of how can we ensure that medicines will be made available or vaccines will be made available towards, for everyone, taken into account the decisions that are taken at national level, who to vaccinate first, etc., taken into account perhaps also guidance which will be provided by the EU institutions, by ECDC, etc. So this will be something that is work. This is something that is work in progress, and that will have to continue. Remdesivir is a first case, and it will come back with the next therapeutic and with the next vaccine. Very difficult things to consider, acknowledging that at the end of the day, perhaps the whole world needs to receive these particular treatments. So, and that the production may be not sufficient in the first phase in order to cater for that.
Thank you, Noel, to clarify this, critical and a very difficult aspect. And indeed, we need to take this forward further. We have as well a question from Jose, which refers to the press conference, and I think he acknowledging how successful it was. They're asking why there was not so much people joining from EU, and there was maybe a barrier. Do you have any analysis of this, Maria-Agnes or Melanie?
I'm happy to respond to that. We don't have an analysis, but I think that we didn't have the German news agency, DPA, for example, or where we had Agence France Presse, but we had probably also not other, important European news agencies. That made a difference. So, but that's, whether there was a specific reason for that, that's really only speculation. It's difficult to really say why we didn't have more. In the end, many also covered it, as I saw only the articles in the first 24 hours, but more media than also in Europe kind of covered the story and, published in particular that main aspect that people were interested in, this forecast on a possible vaccine. So it's difficult to say, but we can, I think, say very confidently that the message got across also in Europe.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I think that's important. I think maybe the dissemination channels were different, but definitely there was a huge impact on this conference, and this encourages EMA to maybe consider doing more in the future. There is a question from Christine Dunn, who is asking whether there is an understanding between FDA, EMA, and Health Canada, international authorities, to authorize a drug or a vaccine at the same time, And I mean, I can take a little bit, I don't know if someone will complement, but there is not such understanding, but there is a lot of cooperation, there is a lot of collaboration. And I think that the element of collaborating, of working all together and pooling synergies is being heard this afternoon a lot. So every region, every regulatory authority has their individual assessment. However, there is willingness to collaborate and to help each other in order to have medicines available as soon as possible. I don't know if Fergus or if someone else would like to comment on this.
Well, can I?
Yes, please.
Well, of course, we are in contact with other regulatory authorities all the time. There are regular teleconferences. At the end of the day, it of course also, before you can authorize something, the company need to submit an application. That may seem very bureaucratic, but nevertheless, it is like that. That's how the system works. So once you have that application with the necessary data, there will be ongoing contact with other regulatory authorities. Is that being authorized at the same moment in time will depend a little bit what is the legal framework which is applicable in each country. So it can happen, it may not happen. I mean, let's take into account again remdesivir, where an emergency use was given by the US, but for instance, the emergency use, that system does not exist at the level of the EU, can be given at national level, but you do not have the equivalent at the European level. You have compassionate use, you may have marketing authorizations, conditional marketing authorizations, something then that the US doesn't have. You see, it all depends a little bit on the framework that is available and what companies will choose. And of course, they need to provide the data that need to be assessed. We cannot simply rely on something which has been made available to another authority.
Thank you, Noel, to compliment. Melanie would like to comment as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's probably nothing further to add on that particular point. I had a comment regarding the comment on the press briefing, and I think one thing also to state is that this is the first press briefing that we've run on COVID, and in a sense it was to let work as to what we do and some of the processes that we put in place. And what we plan is to run further press briefings and news conferences as we start to move forward and we have the first therapeutics and vaccines coming through the process. So hopefully we will also see some further take up at national level across Europe. I also see a comment there from Wonka, and I just wanted to thank you for the comment, Professor Ungen. And indeed, I mean, in terms of primary care, we'd be very happy for your associations to disseminate our communication amongst your associations and members as far as possible, but also to provide us with any feedback on the way we're communicating. If there's more we can do, if there is more things that we shouldn't be doing, would be very valuable moving forward.
Thank you, Melanie. And indeed, this comment is very welcome because, it comes from GPs, but I think it can be extended to the other organizations. We definitely have, again, tools by which you are involved in preparing communications, etc. We need to adapt it to COVID. COVID is such a fast environment but I think indeed dissemination, further involvement in these messages, etc., is something that maybe we would like to count on you, and that we would like maybe to come back to you and to see how we can then do it more ad hoc for COVID-related communication. So we will come back. Thanks a lot.